Without further ado, let me introduce our first day, Maja. Maja is a senior software engineer at Mozilla. She works on low-level protocols for the browser remote control, such as WebDriver in Firefox. She's always looking to make the web more interoperable. Maja's also contributed to Mozilla's massive continuous integration infrastructure, and it is truly massive when you kind of look at it properly. And as recently built multi-browser process management support into Google's Puppeteer library. So with all of that, I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you all too. Let's hand it over to Maja to get started.
Hello, everyone. Let me share my slides here. Okay, you should see me. You should see my slides.
Yep.
All good? All right. So let's talk about browser automation. I work on the component in Firefox that reacts to commands coming from a test script in your favorite programming language. So here, for example, you see a Selenium script. It navigates to a URL, checks the document title, finds an input element, and then enters some text. So what's going on in the background? That Selenium script runs in a client, which sends corresponding WebDriver commands to the browser. And the browser sends responses. So it's a client-server relationship. This is what's happening when you're automating Firefox with Selenium and Gecko driver, for example. The protocol part is what describes the format of the messages sent back and forth. So at the bottom of this slide, you can see an example of a WebDriver command for getting the document title as well as the response. Because Firefox and other browsers all implement the WebDriver standard, you can run that same script against whichever browser you like, and you can expect it to work pretty much the same way across the board. And this is great. It gives you a better chance of deploying a high-quality web application to as many of your users as possible, regardless of which browser or platform or device they choose to use. And that makes a more pleasant internet experience for everyone. But of course, it is not all sunshine and rainbows. Cross-browser testing can be tricky, can be complex. We can feel much pain while trying to implement cross-browser testing. Although major browsers have come a long way toward interoperability in the last 10 years, there are still plenty of scenarios that are hard to test, either because of subtle browser differences or because it's just not clear how to maneuver the browser to check that your app works as expected. And a lot of the time, it's actually timing that is quite challenging. My goal for today is to show you how my team at Mozilla, how we're modernizing browser automation, not only in Firefox, but in the overall ecosystem as well. From Mozilla's perspective as a browser vendor, and also as an advocate for user choice, we're looking at the ecosystem of automation tools as a whole. And we're thinking about what hidden barriers prevent people from building the wonderful new things they are excited about. What we see is an ecosystem of tools that's fragmented and inefficient. So this busy diagram shows you some automation tools as they relate to Firefox. The green and yellow are showing some of the fragmentation. The tools in green use the WebDriver standard for browser automation, and the tools in yellow rely on Chrome DevTools protocol instead. We also see that some projects go to great lengths to offer advanced features and cross-browser support by using many different mechanisms at once to communicate with the browser, including custom protocols and extensions. Cypress is a good example of this. So now imagine if these projects could devote all their resources just to building great automation features instead of maintaining several custom solutions for different browsers. Now, why is the automation ecosystem so messy and fragmented today? The short answer is that the current WebDriver protocol has limitations when it comes to modern automation use cases because it uses a synchronous command response communication mechanism, which is what I was explaining at the beginning. Meanwhile, all the major browsers have internal protocols for their developer tools, which give you access to a lot more. These protocols are bidirectional, meaning that the browser can send notifications back to the client in addition to responding to commands. So for example, you get easy access to network events and better introspection that way. As mainstream programming languages gained first-class support for writing async event-driven code, developers reached for Chrome DevTools protocol especially to add advanced features to browser automation libraries. And that transformed the automation ecosystem into what we see today. So we need a new browser automation standard. The problem with relying on Chrome DevTools protocol, or any DevTools protocol, is that it's tightly coupled with browser internals. The APIs are inherently unstable. They're tied to internal product priorities that don't necessarily match up with automation use cases at all. And so Mozilla and Google and others are working on a new browser automation standard that addresses the pain points we see today. It's going to be a shiny new bidirectional WebDriver standard, and you can learn more about it later today, actually, during an upcoming session by David Burns. And so from now, in the rest of the presentation, I'll refer to this future standard as WebDriver BiDi. Can take a long time to finish a standard. That process takes time. And we at Mozilla want to put something in users' hands right away. So we've implemented parts of Chrome DevTools protocol in Firefox. And the goal of that is to give you a preview of cross-browser testing with a bidirectional protocol. The easiest way to try this out is through Puppeteer. Puppeteer is a popular Node.js browser automation library from Google. This code snippet is showing how you run a Puppeteer script against Firefox. You just need to update a particular option when calling Puppeteer launch. So when in that option, when you set product to Firefox, Firefox is going to be launched against your script instead of the default, which is Google Chrome. Chromium, actually. Although Puppeteer relies on CDP today, we know that the Puppeteer team does want to provide full cross-browser support eventually, and they want to do that on top of a standard protocol rather than Google's proprietary protocol. If you want to try this out with Firefox, be sure to install just the regular Puppeteer package. That package is going to get your scripts working against Chrome and against Firefox. There's a deprecated Puppeteer Firefox package out there, but that has nothing to do with the work I'm describing here. So forget about that one. Now, when you install the Puppeteer package, the appropriate Firefox nightly binary is downloaded and installed for you if you specify Firefox as the product being automated. You can do that with an environment variable. Once this whole project moves out of experimental status, Puppeteer will install Firefox Developer Edition by default at the same time as it installs Chromium without requiring any special install options. Regardless, you can always overwrite these defaults with a path to your own Firefox binary that you've set up yourself. To give you a rough idea of what API surface is supported by Firefox in Puppeteer, we can look at the Puppeteer unit tests. And right now, these have a 62% pass rate. We're going to add more API support over the next few months based on the early feedback we get from users. Likely, our main focus for the next while will be around network events. And so by experimenting with Chrome DevTools protocol in Firefox today, we're gathering experience and user feedback to inform the design of WebDriver BiDi, of the bidirectional WebDriver. A key goal here is to give developers and testers easy access to modern features for their cross-browser testing, regardless of which tools they are using. Firefox support in Puppeteer is a work in progress. It's a proof of concept. Eventually, Firefox will transition away from Chrome DevTools protocol toward that standard bidirectional WebDriver protocol, WebDriver BiDi, as that standard emerges. And we really want to hear from you at this stage. That's why we're releasing this early. There are a few ways that you can participate. First, of course, try Puppeteer with Firefox and file issues on Puppeteer's GitHub repo. we're especially interested in hearing which features you need the most for end-to-end testing in particular, and also just the ergonomics. Is it easy to set up, integrate with your workflow? Can the documentation be clearer? We'd love to hear feedback like that. Also, if you already have an end-to-end test suite that depends on Puppeteer in some way, we'd love if you could send us your logs and some information about your project or tests to give us a better idea of the landscape of, how is Puppeteer being used, how's Chrome DevTools protocol being used. And based on that, we can get a sense of which protocol features are most useful for end-to-end testing in particular. So at the end of all these slides, you'll find a link to my team's contact info, and how you can send this sort of data to us if you like. The way to do it is, as shown in this slide here, you just prefix the command to start your test suite with a debug variable that enables Puppeteer's protocol level logging. Another really useful thing to do in general, regardless of whether you want to give us feedback or not, is to enable additional logging from Firefox on top of the debug logging provided by Puppeteer. You do that by passing some extra options when launching the browser in your Puppeteer script. So when we receive an issue about Firefox support in Puppeteer, if you also include that extra logging from Firefox, it makes it easier to diagnose, of course. We have to triage the issues. We have to identify, is the problem in Puppeteer itself, the client level, or is it a problem with the protocol implementation in Firefox on the server side? Or maybe it's a problem just generally in Firefox that has nothing to do with automation in particular. And the Puppeteer repository has an examples directory. In there, there's a script showing you how to do this with Firefox, how to enable additional logging and get more information. Puppeteer is just one piece of today's fragmented browser automation ecosystem. Fortunately, there's an ongoing effort from many groups to unify this ecosystem under a new WebDriver standard. And at Mozilla, we're gathering insights from our ongoing experiment with Chrome DevTools protocol and Puppeteer to inform the design of this new standard. And as a result, down the line, you'll be able to choose from the best in modern tooling for your cross-browser testing requirements. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Cool. That was a very good talk, Maja. Thank you so much for doing that. I have a few questions, and there's been a few questions that have come in. So the first one that's come in is kind of, are you only going to be supporting Puppeteer? Are you going to, are you still going to be continuing support for WebDriver? I think that's what they're asking. But is WebDriver still going to be supported by Mozilla?
Yes, absolutely. We are always going to support WebDriver, and we expect Puppeteer support to eventually be done through WebDriver as well, right? Like when I was talking about Chrome DevTools protocol being an experiment today, and eventually we're going to consolidate everything under the WebDriver umbrella. That's how we see it. So WebDriver is not going away, and you can count on WebDriver always being there in Firefox.
Brilliant. And so since you're talking about kind of Puppeteer and CDP support, and I see that you've phrased it along the lines of like you're adding in CDP support along the way. Are you what is the kind of the target for the APIs that you're doing? Is it purely for browser manipulation, or is it like you're adding in some dev tools like APIs in there? Like what is the kind of the core focus that you're starting on to build out your API, like your API support? Like if you could expand on how you're picking and choosing.
Yeah, so we already support interaction, clicking, keyboard input, navigation, that core. And we have looked at data from existing end-to-end test suites and other automation tools that use CDP, and looked at the CDP endpoints that they're using and kind of ranked them by priority in that way, and also getting input through from bugs filed from different projects or from individual users. And so based on that, our sense right now is things related to network, request interception, and so on. That's of interest to a lot of people, and we want to focus on that a little bit more. And yeah, definitely like mixing in some more low-level aspects of CDP to support that modern tooling that people are so eager for.
Cool. Is the upcoming protocol going to be language agnostic? Like, are people going to be limited to what languages they have to use? Because, like, obviously Puppeteer is just a JavaScript language. Like, is it going to be like, do you think the Selenium project would help out on kind of multi-language support there?
Right, so there are two different questions, two different concepts here. At the client level, we're talking about Puppeteer or Selenium, and then there's the WebDriver protocol. So to talk to WebDriver, you can use any programming language. It's just a question of creating the client library. Puppeteer is one example of such a client library. Right now, it's talking to Chrome DevTools protocol. Puppeteer can be modified eventually to talk to the new WebDriver standard as it comes out. So if you want to use JavaScript, then pick something like Puppeteer, or there are other JavaScript libraries out there. And if you want to use a different programming language for your WebDriver-based automation, and then those options will also always be there for you.
Cool. And to kind of just to follow up on that, I'm going to kind of talk about that a little bit more in detail, but it's always good to get Maja's opinion on things in my talk later. How does Microsoft's Playwright fit into kind of the work that you're doing? Are they using some of your work? Have they kind of gone off and done their own thing? Like how does it fit into the Puppeteer support that you're adding now?
Yeah, so the Playwright project is very exciting because they also care about cross-browser support. And they are Playwright currently interacts with Firefox through actually interacts with a Firefox fork that they maintain. And this is an example of an automation library that does some heroic work to maintain a custom protocol to be able to interact with Firefox. So we're in contact with the Playwright team, and as our CDP support progresses, as the WebDriver BiDi standard progresses, that situation is evolving, and Playwright will have the option of talking to Firefox directly through one of these other protocols.
Okay, so I guess as long as they kind of keep that heroic work up, there shouldn't be much differences because you've said they're using a fork. There shouldn't be much differences between Gecko. Just as a clarifying follow-up question.
Yeah, so I think the version of Firefox that they're using is always the latest beta. I could be wrong about that. So
Okay.
as Firefox evolves on its own, they have to update their fork and perhaps at the protocol level change their custom protocol if anything changes within Firefox itself. So that's pretty close to the Firefox release, and as a whole the browser isn't radically different, but you can expect different behavior because it's using a different protocol.
Okay, cool. There's lots of questions coming in. Cool. Any chance that Safari will join the WebDriver BiDi work?
I'm not a Safari or Apple spokesperson, but I've seen them at meetings, so that's promising.
Yeah, because this is going through standards, just as a kind of to help Maya on this one, but they've not said no, and Apple continuously keep their cards very close to their chest. But they've not said no, and they're engaging and asking meaningful questions, which tends to be kind of a good sign from Apple. So we'll wait and see that. So yeah.
Yeah, and if people are curious, the standards process is all done out in the open, right? So there's a GitHub repo for WebDriver BiDi already. You can see the issues and the discussion there, and you can follow along as things are drafted, and even comment or tell us about your project's concerns if you like.
Cool. Do you think this is going to be a Cypress killer? Cypress framework?
No, I want to help all the tools out there and make their work easier, right? So that Cypress doesn't have to maintain a browser extension and whatever else they do. If they eventually are able to use WebDriver BiDi, it'll be an easier code base for them to maintain, and they'll be able to direct all their resources to wonderful Cypress features.
Brilliant. There was a question about IE 11. If that's all right, Richard, who's asked it on the Q&A, it's something that the Selenium project's going to have to take care of, and I'm hopefully going to allude to it, how that's going to happen in my talk later. So hopefully you can see it then, but there should be some form of support one way or another. Just double checking my list of questions. I think that's pretty much it. Thank you for your time, Maya. It's been really good.
Just as help to the participants, if I can share my last slide again, there's a link to the project up there. I wish I could use Zoom faster. There we go. Yeah, so the resources here. So for sending logs or finding out how the project is progressing, on the Mozilla Wiki, there's the remote protocol team page with everything you might want to know. And also, I highly recommend signing up for Mozilla's Developer Network newsletter. For example, you'll hear about an upcoming survey that's gathering data from web developers and testers in all sorts of situations to get a sense of kind of what are the top frustrations when building web apps. So we'd love to hear from you in that as well.
Cool. Just one last question, and mostly because I think it's a good one. So would you say the biggest takeaway, assuming all browsers adopt kind of the work that you're doing in prototyping and moving towards kind of what I'm going to be talking about later, do you see cross-browser testing being significantly easier in the future?
Yes, and I haven't said how it will be different because I don't want to overlap with David's upcoming talk too much. I think David is going to show some examples of how it's going to be easier, but short answer is yes.
Cool. And one last one. There's no changes to kind of like the way Puppeteer works headlessly when it comes to using Firefox and the work you're doing. Like the Puppeteer tends to be headless to start up. Is that still the same case with Firefox and the work your team is doing?
Yes, so it works with Firefox headless, and whether you're using Firefox or Chrome, you can choose to run in headless or not. That's not changing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Maya. It was a really good talk. There's been a lot of people saying thank you in the chat and kind of thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.